Good afternoon, students. This is the second video, or part 2, of Nursing Management Healthcare Leadership, Week 2. I'm starting with slide 17 of the deck of slides entitled Strength, Leadership, and Strategies. So again, this will be probably about 20 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. I'll try to get through most of these slides. So starting with slide 17, we want to talk about leadership in terms of tasks and relationships. And I set it up first as, opposing arrows. That there's a kind of a task-oriented style of leadership and a relationship-oriented style of leadership. And sometimes these can be at variance, but as we work through the next few slides, you're going to see that to really be an effective leader, I believe, in today's healthcare world, and my guess is you all will agree with this, is that the leader needs to sometimes be task-oriented, and the leader also needs to sometimes be relationship-oriented. And being all of one or all the other can be problematic in terms of getting the organizational goals accomplished. So let's look at slide 18. A task leader behavior. They facilitate goal accomplishment, focus on policy decisions. There is some task-oriented behavior essential to every leadership role. So you don't want to leave that out. And actually, the task leader behavior begins to speak to perhaps some of the knowledge base that leaders need to have. You need to know what you're doing, and you need to be able to execute pretty well. On the other hand, the relationship leader behaviors, this is where you treat your followers with dignity and respect. You build relationships. You make the work setting a pleasant place to be. You want people waking up every morning or every night and saying, wow, I get to go to work. And I truly feel that about Nebraska Wesleyan. I have a great deal of respect and admiration for Linda Hardy, as well as my coworkers. I've learned enormous from each one of these individuals, and it's just great to be a part of a team that is not only making a difference. There are tasks that we need to accomplish and do well, but we also build relationships with each other. And building up relationships, trust and trustworthiness is one of the most important. Obviously, fairness building. You might flip back to, I think it was slide number 8 or something like that, that kind of gave you that listing of relationship attributes that you might want to think about. And I can talk more with you about those at one of our upcoming class sessions. And then the statement is made, every leadership situation requires a degree of relationship building. And certainly in healthcare that's true. None of us work on an island. We are always working with groups of people, and leadership needs to exist at all levels of the organization. Leadership cannot just be a positional kind of thing. In other words, because somebody has a title as manager, director, vice president, president, that they are the leader. Well, they are the leader sometimes, but we need people at all levels of our organizations being good leaders. So let's move on then to the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. And perhaps you know a lot about Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. I decided to put it in. I think Nordhaus speaks to it. Again, Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, similar to Gallup Strengths, is a way of knowing yourself and then knowing others and the people that you get to work with. And the more we know about ourselves and the more we know about others and the people that we're working with, oftentimes, barriers and conflict and just sometimes small irritants almost kind of melt away. So let's take a look at the MBTI. I hope all of you are familiar with Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, but perhaps you're not. They've been around for a long, long time. They are very useful in relationships, one-on-one relationships, relationships with your spouse, with your children, with your parents. They're very helpful, and I'll give you a recent example in just a minute. They're very helpful in the work setting. There's 16 different personality styles within MBTI, because we have 4 different scales, and then these scales fit together in different ways. So the first scale is extroversion, introversion. And so extroversion, introversion has to do with how a person finds energy. And a person who is high introversion oftentimes needs to go inside, and they need to recoup their energy. They talk about they need time alone. Always being with people, or always, they can be distracted. It's not that so much as they just need to be able to go inside. Then extroversion, on the other hand, somebody may be very tired. I'm describing myself. I may be very tired at the end of the day, and maybe I have an event to go to or a party, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, I don't want to go. But then I end up, I want to see so-and-so, or there's somebody there I should connect with. So I go to the party, or I go to the event, and voila, I'm with a lot of people, and I come home energized. Seriously, and I bet that happens for some of you too. So let's move on to the next scale, sensate and intuition. This has to do with how a person takes in information. Person whose preference is sensate, they're going to take in information from their five senses. What they see, what they hear, what they feel, tactile, feeling, maybe what they taste. The information comes in through their senses. And it's not real unless it's coming in through their senses. People high on the intuition side of the scale, on the other hand, have gut feelings. They are intuitive. They know things that are happening, and they can't always very well describe them. They can't talk about it. It's coming in through the senses. So a sensate and an intuition has to do with how a person takes in information. Let me stop right here and also remind you and remind myself that with these personality styles, we can oftentimes pigeonhole people. But my husband, who worked a lot with MBTI, he was always correcting me or helping me understand that your particular MBTI, your particular personality style, is a preference. It's what you will probably use most often. It's what you will use kind of in a natural way. But it doesn't negate the fact that you can use any of the other styles. So we like to talk about MBTI as a preference, not as a pigeonhole, and not kind of slotting somebody in. So I should have given you that qualifier before I started talking about this slide. Well, let's move on to the third scale, thinker and feeler. Thinker and feeler has to do with how a person prefers to make a decision. There's that word, it's a preference. How we prefer to make a decision. My husband was a thinker, I'm a feeler. He made decisions on logic, and he would analyze and then arrive at a decision. I'm a feeler, so I make a decision based on how it impacts a relationship with somebody that I care about, or sometimes somebody I don't care about so much. But as a feeler, I'm more often going to think about and make a decision based on its impact on another person. And then finally, judger and perceiver. The final scale is judger and perceiver. And this has to do with how a person prefers to live his or her life. And judger isn't about being judgmental. So it's misnamed, but it's been with us for ages and ages. And so, we do talk about the judging, the sense. And under the MBTI, some people are judgers, some people are perceivers. Well, judgers, I can tell you, like to be on time. They like to oftentimes be sequential. They want things in order, if you will. Perceivers, on the other hand, are the kind of people that are almost always scanning the horizon for additional information and new opportunities, and willing to sometimes take a risk, where the judger will be a little bit more circumspect about stepping out. I want to be careful with how I use these terms, because there is great strength and value in all 16 of the MBTI styles. And again, I might bring some additional materials when we meet again as a class, and I can share with you. But let's move on to slide number 20. Within the MBTI, then, we have 4 temperaments. So people are SJs, they're sensate and judging, or they're SPs, sensate perceivers, or they're NFs, they're idealists, or they're NTs. NFs is intuitive and feelers, and and T is intuitive and thinkers. By the way, intuition on the MBTI, because E and I, extrovert, introversion, and then SN, and N stands for the intuition or the intuitive. So as you can see on slide 20, there's a way that these temperaments actually, once you know what your MBTI is and you can identify which temperament you're in, it makes a difference. And actually, I'm intuitive. So my MBTI style is ENFP. That's my preference. And so I'm an intuitive feeler, which means I'm a catalyst, I'm a spokesperson, and I'm an energizer. And I saw lots of that in my work style and things that I just kind of naturally gravitated to. So I was going to give you a personal example, and I'll try to give you a Reader's Digest version. So I have a sister who is an ISTJ, and I'm an ENFP. My sister has lived in the same small town that we both grew up in. There were 3 girls in our family. We all 3 grew up there. 2 of us moved away. 2 of the daughters moved away, and the 3rd daughter stayed home. So she lived with mom and dad for quite a while, and then she moved into her own home. But she's lived in the same community, been very close to my mom and dad. We recently needed to make a decision about my father in terms of his living arrangements. And I was feeling very left out, and I ended up driving to Illinois. I was there in the first part of the month, having a conversation with her, and suddenly it occurred to me, as an introvert, she works everything out internally and then delivers it to the world. And so that's what she was doing. She was working things out internally, not including my other sister and I. I, on the other hand, am an ENFP, and I'm an expressive ENFP, which means part of what that means is that I want to gather the whole family together, and I want us to sing Kumbaya and make the best decision. Well, she and I had some good conversations about all of that. Dad is now in assisted living, and he's safe and getting 3 good meals a day, and we took some pressure off of her. But anyway, slide 21 talks about a temperament exercise that I would have had you do if I was in classroom with you this week, but you won't be doing that, so you can ignore slide 21. But slide 22 is a very busy slide, and yet it might help you if you're not very familiar with MBTI, or if you are and you want to try to begin to understand it more. So working from the outside in, we have on one side introspection, and they label that N, that's the intuitive, and we have, that's on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side in the center we see observant, or S, and then you'll see thinking, feeling, judging, probing. You begin to see some more words. Well, if you go all the way to the next to the outside circle, you see INFP and ESTJ and ISTJ and ESFJ. Those are the 16 different MBTI types. And this particular graphic I found online and found it interesting, again, to help understand. So once you know what your temperament type is, and as I mentioned, I'm an idealist. So I'm intuitive, I'm feeling, that means I'm idealist, but I'm not judging, I'm more probing, and there I am at ENFP. And then it says, one of the ways people might talk about me is a champion. I've never been a cheerleader in my life, I promise you. I had no desire to ever be a cheerleader, but I am kind of a cheerleader about ideas and people that are in my life, and I can champion a cause, I can champion a person, and that comes pretty naturally for me. So you might, if you know your own MBTI, you might track yourself all the way out and see if that word on the outside kind of describes you. So let me very briefly talk about some organizational benefits of MBTI. They help people become aware of differences and thus can reduce conflicts through appreciation of those differences. So I can know that I'm a perceiver. I'm constantly scanning the horizon and wanting to bring in more information. But people on my team might be more often than not have a preference for judging. They want to arrive at a decision and get on with life, so to speak. So it's good when you know where some of the differences lie, and things that might build conflict then can be minimized. MBTI also supports decision-making and problem-solving processes. And it's pretty interesting to watch people with different MBTI styles approach problems differently. And what you have to understand is they have a preference for approaching a problem in a particular way. And it may or may not match the way you like to approach a problem. And as a leader, we gain strength when we pull together teams that have some balance, and that we're not all thinking one way. We're not all approaching a problem in one direction. We're not all making decisions the same way. The third dot point there facilitates team building by identifying those strengths and weaknesses, finding those blind spots. Builds understanding regarding an organization's norms and cultures. Cultures, the person at the top of an organization, or maybe a team of people at the top of the organization, depending on their MBTI preferences, you'll feel that influence throughout the organization. I've seen it over and over and over again, and it happens. The leader, whoever the leader is, and at whatever level of the organization, their personality style is going to impact how that team functions, and culture that occurs. And then a final dot point is it can act as a lens through which to diagnose organizational issues. So, and to organize people and processes to develop strategies and solutions. So once we know what somebody's personality style is, just like when we know someone's strengths, and personality styles and strengths go hand in hand. Let me describe that for you a little bit. You might be a little bit confused. And again, I'm borrowing from some language that I got from my husband years ago. So he would say that the MBTI preference, our personality style, describes the kind of house we live in. It might be a colonial, it might be a ranch house, it might be a split level, maybe it's a Victorian, maybe it's a craftsman cottage. So the personality style describes the kind of house we live in. The strengths then begin to describe how the rooms of that house are furnished. I like that analogy. It helps me kind of put these two things in context. Helps me understand what is personality style and what is strength. So let's move on to slide 24. I've borrowed this. I went out online and found Blake and Moulton's leadership grid, but it's also in our Weiss textbook. Donna Weiss, Felice Tillen, and Marlene Morgan, on page 81, and it's figure 4.1 or 4-1. And this leadership grid is pretty helpful also. And it's a grid, but the y-axis, what's on the left, is concern for people, and then what's on the x-axis, or what's at the bottom, is concern for production. And so leaders you can identify where you fall on this grid. 1.9 would be that you have very, very high concern for people, but very, very low concern for production. So that's called the country club management. Thoughtful attention to needs of people for satisfying relationships leads to comfortable, friendly organization atmosphere and work tempo. But then one has to ask the question, well, but I wonder if they get much work done. So because very, very little concern for production. On the other hand, let's look in the opposite corner at 9.1. Authority-obedience. This begins to sound like Theory X, doesn't it? Efficiency in operation results from arranging conditions of working in such a way that human elements interfere to a minimum degree. So as long as everybody is doing what they're supposed to do and doing it right and doing it on time, yada, yada, yada. So very, very high concern for production, but pretty low concern for people. Well, through the research, what Blake and Moulton discovered, and they've written probably books about this stuff. Well, there's one of them, The Managerial Grid, The Key to Leadership Excellence, is a whole book. I think at one time I had that, but I'm not sure it's still on my library shelf at home. But let's look at 5.5. They've discovered through their research that a really, really good leadership style, if you will, is 5.5. And they termed it organization management. Its adequate organization performance is possible through balancing the necessity to get out work, and I'm going to say while maintaining morale of people at a satisfactory level. So 5.5 kind of describes the best of both worlds. You don't have too much, so you're not always falling into the country club management. Oh, let's just go have fun. Who cares about what we get done today or how the patients get treated? On the other hand, you don't have the authoritarian or the theory X that basically says it's all about production, it's all about what we do as an organization, and I don't really care about you as a person. And so Blake and Moulton help us understand from their research that 5.5, organization management, is really where you would like to be. Well, let's move on to one more concept, and this is on slide 25, and then I think I'll stop and I'll cover strategic planning and nursing. You can review these slides if you choose, but I'll cover them hopefully next week when I'm with you. Not this coming week, but the following week when we meet in September. So a man by the name of Daniel Goleman has done an enormous amount of work around emotional intelligence. And actually, again, in Weiss, you can turn to table 4.1 and you can look at these emotional intelligence domains. And so that's what I've put on this particular slide, although I found one that helped us kind of understand how these domains relate to each other. And then as you read on in Weiss, you see some more about, you can actually go out and kind of reflect on your own and do kind of a self-awareness about your own emotional intelligence. Well, just as intellectual intelligence is important, we've discovered in working with people and being good leaders, emotional intelligence may be even more important. So looking at slide number 25, so we have self-awareness, and that's about kind of knowing yourself, and I've talked a lot about that today. So emotional self-awareness and an accurate self-assessment. You know, of all the 34 Gallup strengths, what am I good at and what is not, you know, what maybe I'm not so good at? Where are my weaknesses? And having some honest self-talk about that, not in a discriminatory way, not in a way of putting yourself down, but being honest about what strengths you bring to the organization and maybe what strengths you don't bring or what weaknesses you bring. But then as we follow the arrow, let's follow the arrow across, because then we look at social awareness. And social awareness, I bet all of you are really pretty good at this. It's entitled empathy. And it's a way that we have of trying to put ourselves in the shoes of the other person, trying to walk their path with them, trying to understand. People with high empathy have this organizational awareness and service orientation. They're more willing to be a servant, and that's vital to ongoing health of an organization. But let's go back to the box that's titled self-awareness, and now go down. So with self-awareness, you want to get into self-management, self-control. Oh, ouch, that's maybe not one of my strengths. But, I do think I am trustworthy. I work at being conscientious, and I'm not saying this all about me, but there's a list of words that under self-management, if we can work on some of these attributes and work to improve ourselves, even bring out of a strength, then we can bring a lot of benefit to an organization. And then eventually you take self-management and social awareness, and those combine in that final box there in terms of what's called relationship management. And relationship management is all about influencing. Now, why would we be interested in influence? Well, we're interested in influence because leadership in our culture, in this day and age, is about influencing others. We've kind of moved away from theory X. We don't work on production lines. We're not in an assembly line. We're not in a manufacturing plant, certainly in healthcare. And instead, what we try to do in healthcare is to influence good behavior of other people and the right kind of behavior that produces high quality patient care. with that, I'm going to stop. I'm over almost up to 25 minutes on this video, so hopefully none of it drops off. Hopefully you can listen to this entire one. It's been nice talking with you about some concepts and some things that I find really exciting: Gallup Strengths, MBTI, and leadership. Thanks. I hope to see you in September. Bye.